How scary is that? Wow. When it comes to freedom, the Empire State is falling short. The Cato Institute labeling New York the least free state in the United States yet again. So where does your state come in? Here with more is National Taxpayers Union's Mattie Duppler. Mattie, good to see you.
Good morning.
Mattie, so let's start with New York, because Governor Andrew Cuomo made a little bit of news recently about how he believes that America was never that great. Maybe
Right.
he's been looking at his own policies and looking at New York. Why is it so unfree?
I mean, unfortunately, it's unsurprising that New York is once again in the bottom ranking of this list. It actually is in the bottom ranking every time the Cato Institute has produced this list. So you'd think New York might take a hint at one of these times. They might reflect a little bit on all the policies in place there. But, you know, we've seen in New York City just recently capping the number of Uber and Lyft drivers that commuters can use there, or increasing the minimum wage. We've seen a lot of local policy that's very harmful. But you look at what the state's trying to do, too. You know, just this week here in Washington, D.C., Treasury released rules and regulations that are trying to prevent states from working their way around the new tax law. New York, of course, is a famously high tax and high spending state. So some of the new tax law provisions, which limit the ability of New York taxpayers to take a state and local tax deduction, New York's trying to get very creative with working its way around the federal law there. And that's just one of the reasons where you see problems with New York's fiscal policies surface when they're trying to combat some of the things happening here in D.C.
So come up with some of the other examples. Give us, our viewers, an idea of how this criteria is used. Obviously, taxation is a big part of it. And we're going to get to the best states, by the way, but let's stay on the worst states and not just pick on New York. Hawaii, California, New Jersey. Why are some of these states the worst for freedom? And we're showing our viewers this graphic. It includes Vermont, Maryland, Oregon, Delaware, Rhode Island, and New Mexico. Why are they the worst 10 states?
A lot of these states have one thing in common. That's high taxes and high spending. Because, of course, when you have politicians who increase the size of government, rather than cutting spending elsewhere, they look to the taxpayers to fund that burden. So things like states like New York, Vermont, you mentioned, I think, Illinois, I think is somewhere in there. You know, they really have not only high spending burdens, they have high tax liabilities because of the promises they have made to their public workers. But Cato also looks at, you know, the freedom of movement for individuals, the ability of individuals to pursue whatever dream they have for themselves in that state. So things like occupational licensing, the ability for Americans to really be able to pursue the employment that they would like. A lot of these states have very onerous laws that prevent people from doing that, from simply engaging in their own chosen commerce. They have to get the government's permission to do so, which creates downward pressure on economic activity and obviously limits choice for Americans living in those states.
So let's also try to be a little positive on this Saturday morning. Let's
talk I love optimism.
I mean, not that you're being negative, but you're giving us the worst states. Let's talk about the best states, because there's always the worst and the best. Florida, I can find a lot of reasons why Florida's good. New Hampshire, obviously, live free or die. No state taxes there. Indiana, Colorado, Nevada, North Dakota, Tennessee, South Dakota, Arizona, and Kansas. Give us a flavor for why some of these states are the best for freedom.
Exactly. Well, you know, I'm a tax girl, so I tend to see everything as tax policy, but that's another thing that these states have in common. A lot of those states that you just mentioned, no income tax there. A lot of these states, too, have been reforming their tax codes in the last several years, getting rid of taxes on capital gains and investment income to unleash capital for businesses to be able to really prosper in those states. And again, removing barriers for people to engage in the commerce that they choose to pursue. It's really important for Americans to be able to use their talents and skills in a way that best suits them and their families. And a lot of these businesses, a lot of these states have gone through regulatory reform that allows Americans to do that.
So if Governor Andrew Cuomo is watching us this morning and, you know, fresh off that controversy of saying America was never that great, what would be your advice, Mattie, for him to get on the top 10 best states for freedom? He's up for election right now. He's maybe thinking about running for president in 2020. How does a state like New York become more free?
I mean, listen, the greatest thing about the United States is the diversity of its people, and the government needs to recognize that. Rather than trying to find a one-size-fits-all policy that benefits simply his vision for the state, he should allow Americans and New Yorkers to pursue exactly what their future benefits are and where they think they can be most successful.
All right, real quick, I got a second topic for you, which is the New York Times just ran an op-ed urging Congress to pass legislation to stop companies from buying more of their own stock. It says this will actually save the economy. But is it... I mean, we were just, topped off the show with the idea that even the New York Times today has a couple of stories in their business section saying the economy is roaring right now.
Right. I mean, there's cognitive dissonance between solutions that they posit with the actual reality of the economy right now. And this buybacks thing shows just how much the left has become unmoored from reality when it comes to economic policy. I mean, this is a total misunderstanding of the way that businesses and capital works in the United States. Now, the left has started to yell stock buybacks like it's a dirty word and run away, like that's somehow some kind of criticism of the new tax law, when in fact, it's really not surprising that the tax law has created the opportunity for more buybacks because it's decreased the barriers for businesses to realize wealth in old capital. Now, that doesn't mean that that happens at the expense of investment, which is what the New York Times piece was arguing. It was saying that workers won't benefit because there's a lot of businesses that are participating in buybacks. Workers will still benefit. It opens up the opportunity for more investment to increase productivity. So the New York Times, once again, bad ideas coming out of there, out of New York State and the New York Times.
Who can be against more investment, more productivity? Let's go. She is no negative Nelly, Mattie Duppler. She is positive, inspiring, and speaking out on behalf of freedom on this Saturday morning. We appreciate you coming in.
Appreciate it as well.
All right. Meanwhile, a Netflix star forced to apologize for supporting conservatives.